Teachers, what's the strangest experience you've ever had with a student's parents? One time, a father, an intimidatingly large man, stormed up to my desk and demanded, "So, what do you have to say about that worthless son of mine? Everyone else has already filled my ears with garbage." His tone was harsh, and he looked furious. I steadied myself and calmly explained that his son was actually a wonderful student, polite, hardworking, and genuinely a pleasure to teach. The man walked away unconvinced, but at least less hostile. The next morning, his son pulled me aside before school and thanked me. He admitted that the only reason his father hadn't beaten him the night before was because of what I had said. That conversation revealed the truth. The boy was being abused regularly. I immediately reported the father to social services, and the boy was eventually placed with his aunt. Years later, I learned he had gone on to excel in school, graduate from university, find a career he loved, and build a happy family. The lesson? Teachers must be cautious with criticism. Sometimes the right words can spare a child from harm. Another story. I wasn't a teacher myself at the time, but I had a rough junior high experience. I was an overweight kid, and my art teacher was openly cruel. He ridiculed many students but seemed to target me often with insults about my weight. After one especially nasty day, when he called me a human garbage disposal, my parents decided enough was enough. They arranged a meeting with him and the principal. In the principal's office, tensions rose quickly. My mom, stepdad, principal, and the art teacher all sat together. But instead of taking responsibility, the teacher looked at my mom and sneered, "Well, now I see where the fat comes from." My stepdad immediately stood up in anger, warning him not to insult his family. The teacher got in his face, taunting him, and even shoved my mom when she tried to step between them. That was it. My stepdad snapped and broke the teacher's nose. And honestly, if you're wondering whether that teacher faced consequences, you're not alone. No way should a man like that have been allowed to teach kids after such behavior. Another incident. A second-grade boy was doing cartwheels during reading time. The teacher, worried he might injure himself, reached out and accidentally scratched his arm with her ring. The skin wasn't even broken. But when the boy told his mother, he claimed the teacher did it intentionally out of anger. The mother burst into the school, barged into the classroom, and attacked the teacher, grabbing her hair and slamming her head against a desk before fleeing with a getaway driver. The poor teacher, only weeks into a second career, was left bloodied with a broken nose. It was horrifying to think about where that child learned to equate anger with violence. Yet another memory. While substituting in a kindergarten class, I noticed a note that a student named Zaria, who had spina bifida, needed to leave her gloves and hat at school. On the first day, I accidentally let her take them home. The following day, the playground supervisor asked for her gloves, and when I said they weren't in her backpack, the supervisor sighed and explained, "We can't let her take them home. Her mom throws them away." I was stunned. In such a brutally cold climate, this was unthinkable. I bought Zaria a brand new set of gloves and a hat, the nicest I could find. Parent-teacher conferences bring their own strangeness too. During my first year of teaching, a parent came in at the last possible minute. Her daughter was a stellar student, so our talk was light. But then, a mouse literally dropped from the ceiling onto my head. I jumped, confused, while the parent calmly pointed to the floor. My co-worker, mid-conference with another parent, stomped the mouse flat with his boot without missing a beat. At our next staff meeting, they jokingly gifted me a bike helmet decorated with mouse traps. Some parent encounters, however, explained everything. I once had a quirky, disruptive student who baffled his classmates. During conferences, I finally met his mother, who stood uncomfortably close, snorted mucus every few seconds, and rambled about conspiracy theories unrelated to her child's education. In 15 years of teaching, I rarely met a parent who so clearly explained a student's classroom behavior without even meaning to. Another time, I assigned detention to a chronically late student who refused to complete her work. Her mother accused me of being racist and prejudiced against biracial children like her daughter. I invited her to a conference. For context, I'm Mexican. After a cruise in the Bahamas, my skin was deeply tanned, my hair curly, and my eyes dark. When the parent walked in, she looked at me once, turned around, and left without saying a word. I never heard from her again. My very first parent-teacher conference as a young English teacher was unforgettable too. Living in a small island community, everyone knows each other by family name. Nervous, I introduced myself to a parent who immediately asked, "So, you're Rachel. Is your dad name?" When I confirmed, he laughed, recalling me as a toddler running around our old apartment, complex in nothing but a diaper. I had no idea what to say. And finally, I once taught a high school media class. One student started out passionate about photography and editing, but gave up mid-year, submitting sloppy work. I gave him extra time to fix things, but he refused, and failed. I thought that was the end of it, until parent-teacher conferences. He showed up at my door with his parents, clearly dreading what would follow. I welcomed them inside and asked them to take a seat. Before the mother even sat down, she exploded at me. "Who the hell do you think you are? You've ruined his entire GPA. This is the field he most wants to get into, and you're discouraging him with grades like this, etc., etc." I tried to politely explain the situation to her and her husband, but it was pointless. None of this was their son's fault. He had been given the assignment and a fair time frame. When that wasn't enough, I even offered him a second chance in the very field he was eager to pursue, yet he refused to correct his mistakes or raise his grade. At that point, the mother leaned across the table almost in my face and said, "All you male teachers are the same. You only care about looking at these young girls. They get special treatment. I know your kind. You make me sick." Back then, it was only my second year of teaching. Being in my late 20s, I was also one of the youngest males on staff. I was pretty shaken because we all know how fine a line must be walked when accusations like this are made. She kept ranting for about 5 minutes, while her husband, who I actually felt sorry for, just sat silently with his head down. Meanwhile, the student seemed unfazed by his mother's tirade, even smirking a little. Finally, she concluded, "You either give him another chance or regrade his project on equal terms." They went over their allotted time, while the next parents waited in the hall and overheard everything. After the chaos, the waiting parents walked in and simply said, "Wow." I awkwardly told them it was a rare case, but still apologized. Since they were the last visitors that night, I immediately went to my superiors and reported what happened. Important detail: the mother was not only on the school board but also a teacher in the same district. Fortunately, my principals supported me, as she had a reputation for being belligerent with others too. She never apologized, and throughout the year I had 3 more encounters with her. Now I cringe at PTAs, not because of poor student performance, but because we live in an age where the student is always right. I haven't changed how I teach or grade, but honestly, this problem crops up every year more often. TLDR: the mother of a student accused me of sexism and favoritism toward girls because her son earned a bad grade. Next story. Teaching, always, provides awkward moments. Once, it was discovered that a female student had been signing my last name on all her schoolwork, even though we weren't related. Needless to say, it became a huge deal. Administration and even the police got involved to determine whether there was an inappropriate relationship. I had no clue this was happening. She wasn't even in my class anymore. Eventually, they told me, once it was clear I had no involvement and no contact with her. The final meeting included the principal, vice principal, guidance counselor, both parents, the student, and me. They asked her the big question: "Why? Are you signing your last name as Ops?" She gave a long emotional explanation about her parents' divorce, how she'd lost respect for both of them, and how she didn't want their names anymore. She chose mine, saying I was the only respectable man in her life. So there I sat next to her parents, just 90 minutes after I first heard about the whole situation. A crazy day, to say the least. Sweet in a way, since I was a positive role model during a hard time for her, but still incredibly awkward. Next story. My mom is a speech and language teacher in a very affluent district. Every teacher deals with difficult parents, but in her case, they're also filthy rich. One parent's child missed the sign-up for the annual talent show. The father sued the school, arguing his son should automatically have a spot since he was in special ed, even though the only issue was a speech impediment. Mentally, the boy was completely capable of signing up on time. Next story. I worked as an early literacy teacher for ELL students from Mexico. One little girl would throw tantrums if she didn't get her way, even making eye contact while deliberately pouring her drink on herself during breakfast. Her attention-seeking behavior was so disruptive that she barely learned. When we called her mother in, she arrived late, ranting that we were starving her child because we had taken her milk away the day before. We calmly explained the behavior issues, but she wouldn't stop disrupting class. I sent students into group work and spoke to her privately. As I described the child's behavior and suggested she wasn't getting enough attention at home, the mother admitted she was too busy with work and her new boyfriend. Then, in front of me, she threatened her daughter, saying if she misbehaved again, she'd be sent back to Mexico alone. So he encouraged her to break rules and disrespect the teacher. After that, he had nothing else to say. Next story. During my first year at university, I was student teaching and left alone briefly in a classroom. A father walked in, assumed I was the substitute, and started hitting on me in front of first graders. I blushed, explained I was just the student teacher, though I left out the fact I was only 18. He got embarrassed and shifted back to helping his kid, just as the regular teacher returned. She noticed I looked shaken and asked what happened. Later, she informed me that the man was married to the boy's mother. Next story. A student felt sick and went to the nurse. They tried every phone number, but no one answered. At dismissal, he went home. The next morning, his mother stormed in with a Ziploc bag full of vomit to prove he'd been sick. It wasn't the only time we nearly had to call the police to escort her out. Next story. A big guy walked in. Ponytail, biker jacket, Harley rider look, the type you'd expect from a motorcycle gang when I first started teaching. I quickly learned that the type of parent who usually doesn't show up to parent-teacher nights is exactly the type you need to brace yourself for when they do. One evening, a large man walked up to me, looked me straight in the eye, and in a low, gravelly growl that matched the sound of his motorcycle asked, "You the one teaching my daughter?" I stayed calm and answered as professionally as I could. "Yes, your daughter is in my Canadian history class. I actually have her marks here if you'd like to." He cut me off. "Not right now. What matters is this. She's terrified of school, hates tests and exams, but for some reason she never misses your class. She always tells me about it. I don't know what you're doing, but she actually likes being there." That was one of the most memorable moments of my first year. His daughter, along with a few other students, suffered from extreme test anxiety. She would freeze up, cry, and fall apart at the sight of an exam. To help her, I arranged for her to write tests at lunch in my classroom where she could eat, relax, and take her time. I supervised, offering small reassurances like, "You studied this, remember? We made notes for your study guide." I also had a system where students who created proper study notes before a test earned an automatic 5% bonus. In truth, the bonus was rarely necessary. About 90% of them did better anyway, simply because making the notes forced them to prepare. With her, I even let her write some of her own exam questions, mostly long answer style, to build confidence. Another quirk of mine at the time was drinking tea in class, so I gave her permission to brew a cup whenever she felt overwhelmed, sit quietly and collect her thoughts before answering. By the end of that semester, she was unrecognizable compared to the anxious girl who had first walked into my room. Her test phobia was nearly gone, and several other students in the same situation had improved as well. But what sticks with me most is how quickly that intimidating father's growl turned into gratitude. That encounter still stands out vividly from my early years of teaching. A student I knew once relied on over-the-counter medication that his mother mailed to him in pill bottles. While he was living in my dorm, she would call me constantly, panicked, whenever she thought he hadn't taken his doses. That whole year was interesting. Here's another story, not mine, but one I'll never forget. A dad once brought my female coworker an enormous pile of sausages, Italian, Polish, every type of meat stick imaginable. He owned a sausage factory, and apparently his way of showing gratitude was filling people's freezers with sausages. She called me over, and we jokingly referred to it as a giant sausage party. OP, man. You really have to be careful with phrasing. Still, I can't say I'd ever turn down free sausages as repayment for a favor. Next story. I once caught two students watching explicit content on one of their phones. I wrote them up, and later one of the mothers showed up for a parent-teacher meeting. To my shock, she demanded to see the video herself. I told her I didn't know what it was and insisted it was a terrible idea. Ignoring me, she pulled up her son's browser history right there, and since he hadn't bothered to clear it, the three of us ended up sitting together, awkwardly watching the video as a team. I can't think of many situations more uncomfortable than that. Another memory. I once taught a boy who, looking back, clearly struggled with mental or developmental issues. His mother had opted him out of special education despite repeated referrals and recommendations. He was intelligent in many ways, but had zero social skills. He'd abandon assignments halfway through because he suddenly decided it was reading time. But the simplest, most maddening problem was his refusal to bring a pencil. Ever. In the middle of lessons, he'd loudly blurt out, "I need a pencil," interrupting everything. I and other students gave him dozens of pencils, pens, even crayons, but the requests never stopped. After months of essentially running a pencil charity, I finally told him, "If you don't bring one, you won't finish your work." I knew he'd fail, but figured his mom would deal with the results. Instead, the following week, his mother stormed into my classroom mid-lesson, furious. "Why are you letting my son fail? He's smarter than all those other kids." I explained he had gone through over 30 pencils. She wasn't interested and went straight to the principal. Shortly after, I got a note. It was now my personal responsibility to provide him with a pencil every day. Fed up, I came up with a plan. Over the weekend, I used super glue and heavy string to. Another memory comes from when I wasn't teaching in school, but at a church program for kids. One little girl kept bringing lice, and her parents never addressed it. Spending time with the family revealed that both parents had developmental disabilities and were incapable of caring for her properly. At one point, her dinner had consisted only of ketchup, the only food in the house. I started taking her out for meals, but the situation quickly overwhelmed me. Eventually, church members stepped in, police became involved, and it turned out the mother was abusive toward both her daughter and her husband. Thankfully, the girl was placed with her aunt, where she finally received real care and proper meals. Next story. My own daughter once brought home a note saying I needed to meet her teacher. She admitted she'd been caught reading A Brief History of Time during science class instead of her 4th grade textbook. She said she was bored because she'd already finished the assignment. I showed up for the meeting, which included the principal, the teacher, and my daughter. The teacher began by expressing concern that she had caught my daughter reading a horror novel, something dark and adult, inappropriate for a child. Then she laid the book on the table. A Brief History of Time. Confused, I clarified, "That's Stephen Hawking, not Stephen King. King writes horror. Hawking writes about science." Even the principal looked baffled. My daughter explained she had understood most of it, though she had to reread the section on relativity a few times. The teacher, after glancing at the cover photo of Hawking in his wheelchair, insisted, "Well, you have to admit, that's a pretty frightening cover. Not something for a fourth grader." To this day, I still can't believe that conversation actually happened. And that's just scratching the surface. Working in schools, whether in the classroom or behind the scenes, means dealing with parents who can be bizarre, overprotective, or just plain unreasonable. I have this one parent who constantly calls me just to complain. Every time we finish a conversation, he wraps it up with, "How about them apples?" I honestly never know what to say. I don't know anything about apples, so I usually just mumble something awkward and move on. What would even be the right response the next time he throws that line at me? Anyway, here's another story. Back when I was in band, so not exactly a classroom story but close enough, my parents had been divorced for years. My dad was the kind of man who never paid child support on time. He'd eventually send the money, but it was always months late. He was also one of the most antisocial people I've ever known, barely scraping by in society. At 14, I was playing percussion in a small-town band. Early in the season, I had this flashy xylophone solo during halftime at a football game. My dad had never once seen me perform or shown the slightest interest in my music. That night, though, right after the performance, he came up to the stands and signed me out for his weekend visitation. On the way home, he went on a rant, calling me lazy, stupid, and irrational. He even said my band director had done wonders with me despite my disability. I just sat there thinking, what disability? Then it clicked. He was referring to the fact that my teacher was a woman, saying she was only rational 2 weeks of the month. My director refused to let him sign me out without my mom being there, and by Monday, I was sitting in the counselor's office. Dad spent the rest of his weekend railing against those idiot teachers who didn't know anything about parenting. Honestly, I wish he hadn't had visitation rights at all. Another memory. I had just finished my bachelor's degree in education, focusing on both elementary and special ed. I landed a job in an inner-city school in the state capital. Being a white guy in a predominantly black and Hispanic district, I knew it might be tough at times, but I didn't realize how much of the hostility would actually come from parents. At my very first parent-teacher conference, things were going smoothly until one mom walked in. Her son was one of my toughest students. I started off with the positives as planned, then eased into some of the struggles, saying, "No matter what approach I try, I just can't get your son to listen to me." Her response? "That's because I told him not to." "You're white." I froze, nodding my head like an idiot, avoiding eye contact, and stumbling over my words. In the end, I shoved the notes into her hand and told her to call if she had questions. Here's another one. I teach high school English in a district with a large Mexican immigrant community. More than once, parents have pulled me aside during conferences and told me, completely seriously, that I had their permission to hit their kids. They'd grab my arm and insist, "Go ahead, you can slap him. I won't say a word." And then, there's my friend in Tokyo who teaches privately. One of her students has a father who's a lead designer at a luxury fashion brand. The kid is sweet and average, nothing unusual. The mom, though, lives like she's walking a runway. My friend noticed that she changed outfits at least 3 times a day. Morning, afternoon, and evening. Always fur, leather, or gold. When asked about it, the mom just shrugged and said she had a lot of free time, plus yoga classes. Must be nice being rich. But not all encounters are glamorous. Once, a parent threatened to cut off my hands if I didn't let her son listen to music during class. When I said no, she looked at me like I had assaulted her child. A week later, she even sent her college accounting homework with her son for me to complete. Keep in mind, I teach middle school. In Japan again, at an English academy for little kids, we had one student whose parents let her do whatever she wanted. During class, she just lay on the floor while the others participated. The teacher stood her up and asked her to try, and the parents exploded. They lectured the teacher for 2 hours, insisting he knew nothing about education. Their daughter was only 3. That teacher had a decade of experience in Japanese schools. Back home, I once had a mom go all the way to the school board because her son got a B+ in my video production class. He was smart but lazy, doing only the bare minimum. A weak final grade dropped him down from an A to a B+. His mother accused me of targeting him, claiming he only got A's at home. She and her husband came storming in. He was clearly just along for the ride, totally beaten down. I arranged a meeting with the principal, who backed me up. Later, I learned she had tried the same stunt with several teachers, but I was the first who didn't cave and hand out an A. Then there are the parents who literally try to fight. I've had one threaten to fight me, others chase after teachers, and one even wanted to fight a 12-year-old boy. Adults, ready to brawl with children. Just ridiculous. Some stories are less violent but still disturbing. At my very first parent evening, I told one boy